Vamos entonces a presentar, aprovechamos que estamos aquí, y vamos a presentar a la directora de la Agencia Federal de Protección Ambiental de la Región 2 de la EPA, Miss Judith Enck, que está aquí con nosotros y verdaderamente es un privilegio, porque lo que hay que hacer ahora en este momento es cuestión de política pública. Y ella va a darnos toda esa información.
Good afternoon, everyone. Not only do I not speak Spanish, but I can barely speak because I've been traveling and I've got a horrible cold, so I apologize if this hurts your ears, but I'm going to get through this because this is really an important gathering, and I really want to congratulate El Puente for convening this amazing conference. Brenda in particular, and Luis Garden Acosta, just extraordinary leaders, and they really set the bar very high for what the rest of us can do on climate issues. The Environmental Protection Agency is very happy to be here today. The way the EPA is set up is we have 10 different regions, and I'm the head of Region 2, and that includes New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the 8 Indian nations in New York, which means I've got the very best region in the country. I want to acknowledge some of my EPA colleagues who are here. Jose Font is the director of our Caribbean division. Please stand, Jose. Hector Velez is an attorney with EPA and a climate change expert. My colleague in New York, Claudia Gutierrez, is here. And I also want you to meet Lisa García, who is EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisor. She came in from Washington. So climate change has huge implications for the Caribbean, particularly in neighborhoods like Caño Martin Peña, which is already so hard hit by flooding. I was so inspired by all of the presentations this morning, the religious and ethical grounding that we were all giving as a lens to look at these issues. Luis Garden Acosta's connection between Brooklyn neighborhoods and what's going on in Puerto Rico. And also the governor's speech. Now, I've been around a while. I know I look very young, but I am more than 25. I've worked for 2 governors. I've attended climate change proceedings of the National Governors Association. The speech that the governor gave this morning on climate change is the best speech I have ever heard a governor give on this topic. And I sat through a lot of speeches. This one seemed very genuine and real to me. And the reason that I know it is real is because the governor has also nominated a number of extraordinary people to serve in his cabinet. People like Carmen Guerra at DMER, people like Laura Velez at EQB, people like Agustin Carbo at the Solid Waste Authority. All of those people have not only the knowledge, but the extraordinary personal drive to make sure that the commitments that the governor made today in these 5 executive orders will be realized. So we are expecting great things from Puerto Rico, and as I said, it has set the bar very high, and I think we're going to go very, very far. So when I'm not traveling on airplanes picking up colds from people sitting next to me, I like to read, and I'm in the middle of reading the amazing new memoir, slide please, My Beloved World by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And the book opens with a quote from Jose Benitez. From the book To Puerto Rico I Return. He writes, slide please, he writes, "Forgive the exile, the sweet frenzy. I return to my beloved world in love with the land where I was born." And I think the question on the minds of many Puerto Ricans is, what will be the condition of the land where I was born? Slide please. The effects of climate change are real, not abstract. Sea level rise, more powerful storms, drought, heat waves, increased ocean acidity, which really damages coral reefs. These are all already observed impacts of climate change. The tricky thing about talking about climate change is we can quickly become all gloom and doom. And the professor and myself will leave you with ideas for action. This is not going to be a depressing presentation. I'm not going to conclude about what we can do. But I just want to talk a little bit about the scope of the problem. The facts are overwhelming. Climate change is here, and it's real. As you know, it's caused by greenhouse gas emissions. The two major sources of greenhouse gas emissions are the burning of fossil fuel at power plants. So start thinking about alternatives to that. The second thing I want you to think about is the second major source of carbon pollution is emissions from transportation. So we're going to touch a little bit on those solutions. Also, it's official. 2012 was the hottest year on record. One of the predicted effects of climate change that affects the Caribbean perhaps the most is more powerful storms. Slide, please. You all saw the impacts of Hurricane Sandy. Slide, please. We're still dealing with the effects of this in New York and New Jersey. You had the effects of that in the Caribbean many times. Lives were lost. Homes were ruined, entire neighborhoods were wiped out. The human suffering was immense, and the economic damage is estimated at about $70 billion. So when people say we can't afford to shift to clean renewable energy, for instance, it's too expensive, this one storm caused $70 billion worth of damage. Now we can say that this one storm was caused by climate change, but what we do know is that hurricanes gain strength in warmer weather. That's why they're called tropical storms. One of the necessary conditions for a hurricane is warm water, and the water we know is getting warmer. Sea surface temperatures have been higher during the past 3 decades than any other time since we started measuring the temperature of the seawater back in 1880. Tropical storm systems are a threat to the safety, the public safety of people who live in Puerto Rico. If you live inland, if you live on the precious islands of Vieques or Culebra, and any of the archipelago of islands, you are particularly at risk. The coral reefs are very much endangered by climate change. I know people who work on climate change nationally, every important issue needs a symbol, and it's often been the polar bear. And you've seen those really sad photos of the polar bears and their cubs on pieces of ice and the melting around them. I'd like to argue today that the symbol for climate change action in the Caribbean should be coral reefs, because coral reefs are so impacted by warm water, bleaching, acidification. It makes the reefs weaker. And when that happens, it's not the fishery nursery that it needs to be. When that happens, it doesn't help block waves during stormy weather. So preserving coral reefs is not just for people who go snorkeling or diving. It's people who want to live in safe communities. Coastal infrastructure has been and will continue to be damaged, and there will be coastal erosion and more frequent flooding. Industries that depend on the environment, including industries like fishing, agriculture, and tourism, will all suffer. We know that there will be threats to public health. Heat waves are more severe and more frequent. So people who are very vulnerable to heat stroke, the elderly, people with asthma, the homeless, are all going to be uniquely impacted by climate change. Next slide. Next slide. Forgot about the slides. I've now caught up. Now is the time for action. President Obama put climate change front and center in his inaugural address. On the issue of climate, he said, "We will respond to the threat of climate change knowing that failure to do so would betray our children and future generations." Similar to what the governor said this morning. Some may still deny the overwhelming judgment of science, but none can avoid the devastating impact of raging fires and crippling drought and more powerful storms. It's a very important statement made by a president. Next slide. President Obama also talked about climate change in his State of the Union address a few weeks ago. He said, if Congress won't act soon to protect future generations, I will. So what can we do? Next slide. We can limit carbon emissions from power plants. Last year, for the first time ever, EPA proposed limits on carbon emissions from new power plants. And that was due to the outcome of a 2007 U.S. Supreme Court decision that found that EPA has the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. Makes sense. We have the authority to regulate asbestos and lead and toxic air contaminants. We also have the authority to regulate carbon air pollution. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled that EPA couldn't decide not to use this authority without providing a scientific basis for that decision. And if you believe in sound science, that's impossible to do. Soon after President Obama came into office, EPA determined that greenhouse gas pollution threatens Americans' health and welfare. Next slide. The Obama administration is strongly committed to the development of clean, renewable energy resources, and we know that Puerto Rico can and must develop these resources here. For years, we've been subsidizing the cost of dirty energy by allowing the public to bear the cost of pollution caused by burning dirty oil and dirty coal at power plants. When you do a true economic analysis, you know that we pay a heavy price in medical costs and lost productivity for this so-called cheap energy. In Puerto Rico, 65% of electricity is provided by burning oil and 16% by burning coal. Only 1% is from renewable energy like solar and wind. It's not a coincidence that Puerto Rico has the highest asthma rate in the United States. A shift toward energy efficiency and clean renewables is not only good for the environment and public health, but will also create jobs. The governor has laid out an ambitious job creation goal for Puerto Rico. So let's just take a moment and look at the jobs created in terms of how we decide to spend our energy dollars. For every $1 billion you spend on building a coal-fired power plant, 870 jobs are created. That doesn't include the jobs of doctors and nurses who have to treat our children who suffer with asthma. For every $1 billion you spend on installing solar photovoltaic cells, we create 1,800 jobs. And for that same amount spent on wind, we create 3,300 jobs. Next slide. Solar panels have dropped in price by 80% in the past 5 years. And the sun is the most reliable and indigenous form of energy in Puerto Rico. You've got the sun, you've got the wind, you've got the waves. So that should be the foundation of Puerto Rico's energy future, not dirty coal and dirty oil. Now I want to ask you, what state do you think has the most solar panels installed in the whole country? Take a guess. California? No, they're second. Texas? No. You're never going to guess. Not New Mexico. Okay, one more. No, no, no. It's New Jersey. And that was because of state government leadership years ago. So Puerto Rico gets a whole lot more sun than New Jersey. And so I think you can speed by New Jersey in the matter of a few years. Other countries have already started this transition. In Germany, 1 million homes have solar panels on their roofs. 1 million homes in Germany. And they're not very sunny. 10% of Australian homes have solar panels. A report by the United Nations found that worldwide $257 billion were invested in renewable energy in 2011. We've got to bring that investment here to the Caribbean. There are some very practical ways to do that. EPA, for instance, is working very hard to site solar panels on top of closed municipal landfills and brownfield sites. We did a feasibility study looking at 19 closed landfills, including in Vieques. We want to work hard in the months ahead to get solar panels on these closed landfills. We're working with the private sector who are ready to install these solar panels on closed landfills. But before this can happen, PREPA needs to finalize an agreement establishing the rules and the rates. And EPA is encouraging PREPA to act very soon. We want to see these closed landfills turned into assets in these communities. Next slide, please. A few words on energy efficiency. Yesterday, I announced, along with HUD and the Green Building Council and the Mayor of San Juan, that EPA has designed a unique energy star rating for homes just in Puerto Rico. I'm sure whenever you buy a new appliance, you look for that blue star, which is an energy star rating. And you may do it because you care about the environment, or you may do it because you're really cheap and you want to save money on your monthly electricity bills. I do it for both. So what a lot of people don't know is there are Energy Star for buildings, and we know that the tropical climate in Puerto Rico is very different than New York or California. So HUD and the Green Building Council, coincidentally at the same time, asked EPA a few months back to do an Energy Star program just for buildings in Puerto Rico, and that's what we announced yesterday. EPA's new office is LEED certified, LEED Gold office space, so come visit us there. It's the first Gold LEED certified office in Puerto Rico. And I think a lot of businesses are turning toward energy efficiency because it saves money. A new study by Deutsche Bank, not Greenpeace, not the Sierra Club, Deutsche Bank, found that improving energy efficiency in buildings nationwide represents a $279 billion, that's with a B, dollar investment in opportunity in the United States. It would also reduce carbon dioxide pollution by 600 million metric tons. That's 10% of the U.S. output, and would create 3.3 million new jobs. Another way where Puerto Rico will be a leader in fighting climate change is in the area of waste reduction, reuse, and recycling. Recycling is a great way to conserve energy and therefore tackle climate change. Take just one aluminum can, which I meant to bring up with me, but I forgot. Take an aluminum can that your Pepsi or Coke came in. If you make a new aluminum can from recycled material rather than virgin ore, you save 95% of the energy in making that can. It also reduces the need to mine, transport, and process new materials. The amount recycled by Americans in 2010 was 85 million tons of material. This prevented the release of 186 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. That recycling activity is the same as taking 36 million cars off the road for a year. In contrast, the solid waste disposal situation in Puerto Rico is dismal. Residents of Puerto Rico produce 5 pounds of trash per person per day. So I know numbers can be numbing, but just think about you woke up a few hours ago. Hopefully you're still awake. My speech is not putting you back to sleep. But you woke up. By the time you go to bed at night, if you are typical, and I know you're all above average, but if you're typical, you will have generated 5 pounds of garbage today. All of that waste in Puerto Rico is sent to landfills to decompose, producing methane gas, a greenhouse gas that's 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Most of Puerto Rico's 29 municipal landfills are out of compliance with environmental regulations, and many are running out of space. This must change, and it will change. In 2010, EPA launched the Puerto Rico Recycling Partnership. With the help of Mark Lichtenstein and his colleagues at Syracuse University, a plan was written which is a blueprint for how to handle solid waste on the island. And it's on the Puerto Rico Recycling Partnership website. The plan says first, reduce the waste stream. Simple things like double-sided printing, bringing your own container to a conference rather than using single-serve plastic water bottles. So there's endless things we can do to reduce. Reduce, recycle, and then third, compost yard waste and food waste. That will get you quite close to a goal of zero waste. It's not going to take care of everything, but for what you can't reduce, recycle, and compost, you can put in a small amount in a municipal solid waste landfill that is lined and in full compliance with environmental laws. This approach is not only the most environmentally protective, it's also the cheapest. So it will save tax dollars and will create scores of new jobs. Nationwide, 1.4 million people are employed by the recycling industry with a payroll of $52 billion. There are some very important local recycling companies in Puerto Rico, but not nearly enough. So if you want to create jobs, commit to recycling. Working with the new administration, I'm actually very optimistic that we can completely change the way solid waste issues have been addressed in Puerto Rico. I've met with the governor's appointees and his nominees, and they are on the same page as EPA is on. So I'm very optimistic about the future. This commitment will conserve energy, natural resources, reduce litter, save tax dollars, and create jobs. Next slide, please. I just want to, so that's recycling. Isn't it beautiful? Aluminum cans. Next slide. So just a word on mass transit. More needs to be done to expand mass transit in Puerto Rico. There are 3 cars for every 4 people in Puerto Rico, one of the highest rates of car ownership in the world. And so not surprisingly, Puerto Rico also has the highest asthma rate in the nation. Air pollution may not cause asthma attacks, but it triggers asthma attacks. And if you or your family suffer with asthma, you know how frightening that is. I don't have to tell you that traffic in San Juan can be atrocious. So investments in reliable buses, light rail, and other forms of mass transit would make Puerto Rico, and particularly San Juan and Ponce, a more livable and more breathable community. I live in New York City. Can you imagine what New York City would be like without the subway system? So this is a great shift, and there's a real need to build reliable mass transit in Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. My job as EPA Regional Administrator is to stand alongside the people who are working to fight climate change. And I want you to stand with me. I want you to use this conference to learn, to ask questions, and to share what you know so that this knowledge will help move the government of Puerto Rico and the businesses in Puerto Rico and the neighborhoods in Puerto Rico in a new direction. A direction based on clean energy, environmental sustainability, job creation, and environmental justice. I'm a big believer in the quote by Gandhi, "When the people lead, the leaders will follow." This conference will provide all of you with the latest information for you to be leaders in your community. Puerto Rico can be the national leader in renewable energy, particularly in solar. Puerto Rico is poised to dramatically expand waste reduction, recycling, and composting programs. Puerto Rico can invest in mass transit. Your voice, the voice of Puerto Rico, is absolutely critical in this national climate change debate as we tackle one of the most serious environmental and economic challenges of our lifetimes. Thank you.